In today's video, we're diving into one of the most transformative and turbulent periods in American history, the home front during World War I. While battles raged in Europe, another war was unfolding in the United States, a war over government power, freedom of speech, labor, race, and identity. This is the story of how America was changed forever during the Great War years of 1917 to 1919. Let's get started. As is often the case in wartime, government power in the United States expanded rapidly during World War I. By the time the war ended in 1918, the federal government had appropriated a staggering $32 billion dollars for war expenses. To put that in perspective, the entire federal budget before 1915 rarely exceeded $1 billion. dollars. To finance this massive cost, the government turned to the American people. It sold Liberty bonds, raising $23 billion dollars in public loans. At the same time, new taxes, especially the graduated income tax enabled by the 16th Amendment, brought in an additional $23 billion. dollars. The federal government also seized control of critical infrastructure. The telephone, telegraph, and rail industries were all nationalized. A sprawling bureaucracy emerged to manage wartime responsibilities, most notably the War Industries Board, created in July of 1917 to coordinate industrial and agricultural production and supply the Allies, whose own production had been devastated by the war. Meanwhile, the National War Labor Board, founded in April of 1918, mediated labor disputes. It pushed for an 8-hour workday and other protections, but in return demanded that workers not strike, a clear example of how government controlled both capital and labor. With war came censorship. Amid growing opposition to American involvement in the conflict, the government cracked down on dissent. Congress passed the Espionage Act in 1917, making it illegal to use the mail to interfere with the draft or the war effort. A year later, the Sedition Act of 1918 outlawed speaking ill of the government, the flag, the military, or the Constitution, or even discouraging the purchase of war bonds. The laws were loosely written and broadly enforced. In 1918 alone, more than 1,500 people were arrested simply for criticizing the government or the war. One of the most famous cases was Schenck v. the United States in 1919. Charles Schenck, a socialist, distributed leaflets urging men to resist the draft, which he argued was a form of involuntary servitude, a violation of the 13th Amendment. The Supreme Court, led by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, rejected his argument, famously stating that free speech could be limited if it posed a clear and present danger. You can't, as Holmes said, falsely yell fire in a crowded theater. This ruling became a powerful tool for silencing dissent and curbing unpopular opinions during wartime. To manage public perception and promote national unity, the government created the Committee on Public Information, headed by journalist George Krill. The CPI flooded the nation with over 75 million pieces of printed propaganda. It encouraged newspapers to censor themselves and present the war in a government approved light. Began renaming sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage. But the consequences were more than culinary. German immigrants faced serious discrimination and violence. Being German American suddenly meant hiding your identity or facing the consequences. Paranoia swept the nation in the wake of the Russian Revolution of 1917. As the Bolsheviks seized control of Russia, Americans feared a similar communist uprising at home. This fear triggered the first Red Scare. Labor unions, like the International Workers of the World, were targeted as subversive targets. Leaders were arrested. Even Eugene Debs, the Socialist Party's standard bearer, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for opposing the war. In response to growing fears, the government created the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, with a young J. Edgar Hoover at the helm. Under the guise of protecting America, the government empowered businesses to suppress unions and radical dissent with force. Tensions reached a breaking point in 1919 when bombs exploded in multiple cities, including one that injured a senator's maid and another that destroyed the front of Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer's home. Palmer launched the now infamous Palmer raids in early 1920, rounding up over 10,000 suspected radicals across 30 cities. Homes, social clubs, and union halls were raided without warrants. Civil liberties were trampled. Only about 500 people were ultimately deported, and few actual weapons or bombs were found. But the damage to American civil liberties was done. With immigration nearly halted, down to just 110,000 arrivals in 1918, and 4 million men in uniform, America faced a severe labor shortage. This opened the door for women, Black Americans, and ethnic minorities to enter new sectors of the workforce. Women took jobs in factories, leaving domestic service behind. At the peak, women held 20% of factory floor manufacturing jobs. Many Black women, like the one who left domestic work to become a factory worker, found new independence, stating, "I'll never work in nobody's kitchen but my own anymore," she declared. Still, most women returned to their old jobs after the war, encouraged or pressured by unions and society to return to domestic life. The war also fueled the Great Migration. Northern cities, desperate for workers, sent recruiters into the South. More than 500,000 Black Americans left the South for cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York. They were escaping not just poverty, but also racial terror. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender urged migration, calling the North a land of promise. One editorial boldly stated, "To die from the bite of frost is far more glorious than at the hands of a mob." Mexican Americans followed similar paths northward. By 1930, the number of Black Americans in the North had tripled compared to 1910. African Americans served the country with pride during the war. Over 370,000 Black men were drafted, but most were assigned to labor units rather than combat, reflecting prevailing racism within the military. When the war ended, Black Americans hoped their service and sacrifices would lead to better treatment and civil rights. On February 17th, 1919, the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, received a hero's welcome as they marched through New York City. W.E.B. Du Bois captured this spirit in his powerful editorial, Returning Soldiers. He wrote, "We return. We return from fighting. We return fighting. Make way for democracy." But instead of recognition, they faced brutal backlash. The summer of 1919 became known as the Red Summer, not for communism, but for blood. Race riots broke out across 25 cities, including major violence in Washington, D.C., and an especially devastating week in Chicago. In Elaine, Arkansas, over 100 Black people were massacred for attempting to unionize. Lynchings also surged from 64 in 1918 to 83 in 1919. At least 11 victims were returning Black veterans. World War I reshaped the American home front in profound and lasting ways. Government power surged, civil liberties were redefined, propaganda ruled the media, fear of radicalism changed how Americans viewed immigrants, workers, and dissent. Meanwhile, African Americans and women seized new opportunities, only to be met with resistance when the war ended. It was a time of promise and pain, hope and heartbreak, a time when America fought not only a war abroad, but many wars at home. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.